Let's reset the narrative, not the viral clips, not the dramatic edits layered with orchestral music, not the outrage-driven hot takes designed to provoke reaction. Instead, let's examine what actually happened step by step, in chronological order, grounded in documented decisions and verifiable actions. Because when you remove the theatrics and focus on institutional behavior signed agreements, procurement reviews, financing mechanisms, and structural policy shifts, what emerges is not dramatic spectacle, it is structural change. And structural change is far more consequential than political theater. To understand what Canada is doing today, you cannot begin in 2025 or 2026. You have to step back decades. For much of the modern era, the United States and Canada have maintained what many analysts consider one of the most deeply integrated bilateral defense relationships in the world. Not merely close allies, not simply strong partners, integrated. Canada's defense sector has long been intertwined with American contractors, supplying components, collaborating on systems, and embedding itself within U.S.-led supply chains. Approximately 70% of Canadian exports flow to the United States. The two nations share the longest undefended border on Earth. They jointly manage continental air defense through NORAD. They cooperate through the Five Eyes intelligence network. Their military supply chains have not just overlapped, they have been structurally interconnected. This alignment was not symbolic. It was architectural. That context is essential, because what followed represents a measurable departure from that architecture. In February 2025, the United States imposed sweeping tariffs on Canadian imports 25% on most goods, with a reduced rate applied to energy exports. Simultaneously, political rhetoric intensified. Canada's defense contributions were publicly questioned. Its role within NORAD was scrutinized. Comments suggested it was not carrying its weight. There were even remarks implying annexation and characterizations of Canada as a national security concern. Whether one interprets those statements as political strategy or negotiation tactics is secondary. From a risk management standpoint, the message was unmistakable. Uncertainty had entered a relationship long treated as stable. Leadership background matters in moments like this. Mark Carney is not a conventional political figure shaped primarily by electoral cycles. Before elected office, he served as governor of the Bank of Canada and later as governor of the Bank of England, the first non-British citizen to do so. He navigated the global financial crisis and later managed financial stability during Brexit. His professional identity is grounded in systemic risk analysis. When someone trained in systemic risk hears unpredictability in trade policy, defense cooperation, and sovereignty rhetoric from a primary partner, the response is not emotional, it is structural. The response is diversification. That diversification began to materialize in early 2026. At the World Economic Forum in Davos in January of that year, Carney delivered a speech framing the global moment, not as a transition, but as a rupture. He argued that middle powers could no longer assume the post-World War II order would operate as it once had. He warned that economic interdependence was increasingly being used as leverage and suggested that countries needed to rethink how they anchor security and prosperity in a more fragmented world. He did not frame the argument as anti-American. He framed it as adaptation to systemic risk. The speech resonated across Europe, where leaders and analysts described it as an inflection point in tone and direction. Soon after, tangible institutional moves followed. In February 2026, at the Munich Security Conference, Canada joined the European Union's SAFE Initiative Security Action for Europe, a $150 billion defense financing mechanism backed by the European Investment Bank. The initiative's objective is explicit: strengthen European defense production and reduce dependence on external supply chains. Canada became the first non-European country admitted. That development carries strategic weight. When a nation deeply interwoven with American defense contractors joins a European program designed to build independent supply chains, it signals deliberate hedging. Membership allows Canadian firms to partner with European manufacturers and compete for EU-backed defense contracts. It embeds Canada within alternative procurement ecosystems. This is not rhetorical positioning, it is contractual architecture. Around the same period, Canada's finance minister attended a Eurogroup session, the gathering of Eurozone finance ministers responsible for coordinating economic policy within the Euro area. Historically, that forum is reserved for European members. Canada's participation, framed as strategic engagement, signaled another layer of deepening institutional alignment with European structures. Again, not dramatic, but meaningful in cumulative effect. Meanwhile, Canada reassessed major defense procurements. The country faces modernization pressures across multiple domains. Segments of its naval fleet are aging. Submarine capacity has been limited. Certain land and air assets are nearing obsolescence. Public acknowledgments of operational gaps underscored the urgency. Canada initiated a competitive process to acquire up to 12 new submarines, with life cycle costs potentially exceeding $100 billion. The leading contenders include Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. No American company is currently in contention. Simultaneously, Canada launched a review of its planned purchase of F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin and opened discussions with Sweden's Saab regarding the Gripen E-fighter. Domestic polling indicated significant public support for considering non-U.S. alternatives. Procurement decisions extend far beyond sticker prices. Defense platforms generate multi-decade ecosystems maintenance contracts, parts supply chains, software integration, pilot training, and industrial offsets. Selecting a submarine or fighter manufacturer effectively shapes defense architecture for a generation. If Canada diversifies suppliers at scale, that diversification is not easily reversed. It becomes embedded in infrastructure, workforce training, and industrial strategy. At the same time, Canada advanced a $28 billion NORAD modernization plan focused heavily on the Arctic. Investments include over-the-horizon radar systems, expanded satellite tracking capabilities, underwater surveillance networks, and advanced navigation technologies. Geography is central to this strategy. The shortest aerospace routes between North America and Eurasia pass over the Arctic. Canadian territory provides forward positioning for sensors and early warning systems critical to continental defense. By modernizing that infrastructure, Canada increases its autonomy in shaping how that terrain contributes to shared security. Taken individually, none of these actions constitutes a rupture. Together, they form a pattern: expanded defense engagement with Europe, participation in EU financing frameworks, diversified procurement pathways, elevated economic coordination with Eurozone institutions, and significant domestic investment in Arctic defense capabilities. Analysts began describing the shift not as abandonment, but as evolution, a movement from a deeply relational alliance model toward a more transactional one. In such a model, cooperation continues, but assumptions of permanence are replaced with calculated contingency planning. Governments begin pricing in uncertainty. Institutions do not respond to risk with speeches alone. They respond with spreadsheets. From an American perspective, this evolution carries implications. For decades, U.S. defense planners operated under assumptions of seamless industrial integration with Canada, predictable geographic access, stable political alignment, and shared procurement frameworks. If Canada incrementally embeds itself more deeply with European and Indo-Pacific partners, the United States does not lose an ally, but it may lose exclusivity. Defense industrial ecosystems become more multipolar. Contracts that once defaulted to American firms become competitive. Interdependence shifts from automatic to optional. Over time, that subtle shift compounds. The core question is not whether Canada remains aligned with the United States. It almost certainly will. The question is whether the alliance's architecture evolves from integrated to modular. Alliances built on integration are deeply resilient. Alliances built on transactions are flexible but conditional. From Canada's standpoint, diversification reduces vulnerability to policy volatility. From the American standpoint, it reduces structural leverage. Was this pivot inevitable? Interpretations differ. Some argue global multipolarity would have driven diversification regardless. Others contend that tariffs and escalatory rhetoric accelerated the timeline dramatically. What is undeniable is that governments respond to incentives. When policy signals introduce unpredictability, rational actors hedge. And once those hedges are embedded into financing structures, procurement decisions, and infrastructure investments, they endure. This is not fundamentally a story about personalities. It is about incentives, architecture, and strategic adaptation. Canada is not severing ties, it is expanding options. The long-term consequences will not appear in daily headlines. They will manifest over decades in contract flows, industrial partnerships, and defense manufacturing footprints. Strategic transformations rarely arrive with fanfare. They accumulate quietly. When historians eventually examine this period, they may not focus on speeches or rhetoric. They may instead examine the agreements signed in European capitals, the submarine facilities toured abroad, the Arctic radar arrays installed across northern terrain, and the financing mechanisms embedded within multinational institutions. Those are the building blocks that reshape alliances. The central question remains: when one of the most integrated bilateral defense relationships in the world begins structurally diversifying, who ultimately bears the long-term cost? The country insulating itself from volatility, or the country that once benefited from structural centrality? The answer will not emerge overnight, but the architecture is shifting, and architecture, once redesigned, tends to endure.